Hi everybody. This little video is designed to support the workshop that we're going to be doing in August 2020, and it focuses on the use of charcoal and chalk and the mixtures of those things. I'm really hoping that you make the most of the marks and the experimentation that we're going to do. So hopefully this video will give you some sense of that before we actually get to do that. The big emphasis on this workshop is to explore, to experiment, and to observe what happens to your medium as you use it. Focus on that moment as you do that, not way ahead about what's my drawing going to be like at the end of it. That's not important really at this point in time. At the end of the video, there's some little examples, I think, of very nice, interesting charcoal drawings by some great artists. So please have a look at that as well. Watch it as many times as you want before the workshop itself. And I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you on the day. All right, folks. This is the stick of charcoal. Okay, you can see already that my fingers are becoming black, but that, as I've warned many of you, is part of the deal, if you like. But very exciting at the same time, if you get the feel of how to use this stuff. Thinking about the simplest mark we can make is a line. Okay, so no kind of big surprises there. It's a darker line than we get with pencil, but if we vary that line and remember this old set of rules, gesture, angle, and pressure. So the first thing is we can think with charcoal, we can think of a gesture. So we can have the slow mark that I've just made. We can have fast lines that we can make very quickly. The angle of the charcoal is important too. So rather than an upright charcoal, I can hold it right up to the point. You can see there I can get a very fine line. So charcoal is often thought of as being a very bold, crude medium almost, but it's really very delicate. It's as delicate as pencil can be. So if I take the pressure right off my hand and barely lean on it, in fact, the only pressure is the weight of the charcoal there, you can see the difference between that quality of line and these qualities of line. And if you think about it in terms of space, like any drawing rule, if I have that very delicate quality back here, and down here I have something stronger by leaning that little bit more heavily, you can almost see a little landscape appearing there with mountains in the distance and mountains or hills closer by, simply because they're more dense and intense than the delicate line I have here. So the first thing to remember is charcoal can be very varied and very versatile and very wide in its ability to make from delicate to very extreme bold marks. And that is simply just with the notion of line. We haven't manipulated it in any other way at the moment. The other quality that charcoal will have, of course, is the angle at which we hold it. So we have been holding it at the moment up high, if you like, and drawing with the point, which is fine. And we can create all sorts of marks with that. The little point, for instance, I can squiggle and make different gestures there. Look, you can see all the various little textures that are beginning to happen. And this is the purpose of this workshop, to make you look at what's going on here. Don't ignore this. Don't get carried away on, I must make a drawing. I must make this likeness of whatever I'm looking at. Take time and look at what your medium is doing, what this piece of charcoal right here is doing. So the second thing I mentioned there is angle. Okay, so of course we can take and work with the flat edge. So you can see that rolling around there. If I broad marks like that. And you can see also that the nature of those marks, because of the grain on the paper or the card, when it hits the charcoal, you can see the graininess of the card coming through. So there's a lovely surface quality there. It could be used for rocks or trees or sand or all sorts of things, clouds perhaps. And so we're using the relationship between the grain of the paper and the nature of this powdery stuff here to make something happen. If we change the paper, if it becomes a very heavy watercolor paper, that will change it again, of course, because the grain will be different. If we try it on a very, very smooth paper, it'll be different again. This is a sort of an average piece of card, fairly cheap card, but it's got a little bit of a bite. And as I said before, think about what is it going on with this stuff. It's powder, and it's being rubbed into the grain of paper. And depending on how you control that, you can control the marks. So far I've dealt with some line, some areas created by the edge of the charcoal here rather than the point. And there's everything in between. You can, for example, use slightly at the edge. You see, I've just turned the angle of the charcoal from upright to a little bit like that. And that's what I got. When I fold it right down to that, this is what I get here. So the angle of the medium, the charcoal itself, will determine all of these things. And look already at all the variety we've got. And we haven't even begun to think about what we're going to do with the charcoal once it's on. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But just think about that whole point, literally the point of it being either upright or at an angle or flat on the side or various positions, if you like, in between. Think of the gestures you make. It can be slow point. It can be slow with the side. It can be fast with the point. I'll just work up here a little bit. Fast with the point of the charcoal to create these surfaces, or it can be fast with the side. So you can see what's happening here. As I work quickly, all of these curly, cloudy sort of things going on up here and up here, and that's slightly different to what we get when we work fast with the point. So we've dealt with angle and gesture and the pressure. As I said before, if we look down here, if we press hardly at all, we'll get that. If we press very hard, we'll get this. And the same with the side of the charcoal. If we press very lightly, if I run my hand down very, very lightly, we get that. Just that lovely grain there. Look at that. Try to be aware of these marks and ask yourself always, what can I do with those? What could I do with this mark? If I increase the pressure, you can see what I get there. This lovely rich edge where the pressure was a wee bit more. And over this side, over the left side, the pressure must have been slightly less. Therefore, you can see the paper shining through. And you can see already in this little sheet of experiments the marks that I'm capable of simply by pressure, the gesture, and the angle of that piece of charcoal. So we've looked at the qualities of line and angle and pressure and how those marks will appear depending on how we manipulate the angle and the pressure and so on of this piece of charcoal. Let's look now at what happens after that. And what I mean by this is, for instance, if I take, and we go back to the simplest mark perhaps, which is line. There's a nice slow, gentle line. Remember now, charcoal is like paint without the medium, without the liquid medium. Charcoal, you can see in my fingers there, it's a powder. So it's distributed through and onto the paper just like the powder in paint is distributed, except paint uses a liquid to carry it. We don't have a liquid. We have to physically move it around with our fingers or some other tool. So if I take that line and I simply give that little rub there, you can see the slightest ghost appearing on the edge of that line. And if I begin to rub and a little bit more firmly, you can see what happens with the charcoal. I'm spreading it out sideways and so on. I can rub up the way, up and down like that. And along that top of that line, you can see how it changes the line from a crisp line. I'll leave a little gap here and come over here, and I can work this in here. And be aware of how much you can spread. That was one line, remember, that was one simple line of charcoal. And look, I know my finger's a little bit dirty, but from that one little bit of dust on my fingers, if I rub and rub and rub, you can begin to see how much you can create, if you like, with very, very little charcoal. And like so many mediums and things with painting, sometimes we overuse them. That one line of charcoal plus the remains of the dirt on my finger, or the charcoal on my finger, I'm rubbing and rubbing quite hard, because there isn't much, I have to work hard to make it spread and move. But what I'm trying to show you is, look at the marks that are appearing up above that line. And I know it begins to look again like a hill, but that's okay. And up above this hill, these clouds perhaps, or some other surface. I've left this little bit of light here because it kind of looks like sunlight gleaming through. I'm still rubbing. I haven't applied one more piece of charcoal. I haven't touched that paper with a piece of charcoal since I made the line. And if I keep rubbing at that and rubbing at that, and it is quite physical, and of course you can use gloves. I think if you don't like the feeling of the charcoal on your fingers, or you don't like that, yes, use gloves. But when it comes to rubbing like this, perhaps use something like a tissue or a piece of cotton rag or something to rub. I think it will give you a better effect than if you try to rub with a rubber glove. If you try to rub that, obviously with rubber gloves on, or plastic gloves, whatever, it's like using a rubber or eraser, so it will be rubbing bits of this out. So it won't really work, and it will grip. It will stick all the time, so you can't get that lovely smooth flowing with your fingers. But you can see there, I'm really working that in there. I'll bring it down a little bit over that line, and you can see the quality of that there. That, you know, if someone said, look, I want a really cloudy, soft, misty sky, or I want a really smooth piece of velvet, well, look what we're getting there. And that's just with the dregs of what's on my fingers here. Let's go back to the charcoal itself. If we apply more charcoal, then we have a bigger reservoir to spread. If any of you saw my recent video on watercolor, you might remember that, you know, you can begin by putting paint on, and the more paint, the more concentrated the paint, then the more of a reservoir you have to use to spread throughout the rest of your page or your paper or whatever. So, for instance, if I was to this time rub quite hard here and there with this charcoal, just making a 2 or 3 dots, I guess. But I'm rubbing really hard. You can see how black those are. So there are lots, there is lots of charcoal stuck on that paper right now, because I've rubbed hard on like this line, which was very, very delicate. So I have lots of charcoal to work with, and therefore you can see that it's spreading very quickly. The lightest of touches, I'm not really rubbing that hard, but you can see if I keep rubbing that, you'll notice something as well, that if I don't rub too hard, I retain the original shape of the charcoal. I'm spreading some of it out from the middle towards the outer parts. You can see that. I'm using this charcoal to fill in, if you like, the gaps in between here. But the bits that I originally put on aren't moving too quickly, because they're well gripped into the paper. But if I take and rub that bit harder, you can see there it's moving now. If I put a wee bit of more pressure on, I can now distribute the center concentrated area if I want to. So I have a choice. If I rub lightly, I can retain shapes underneath the shadow, or if I rub hard, I can make the shapes spread. And just by trial and error and experimentation, you can play with this until you spread some of it. Other bits you may not want to spread so much. So I might retain that bit, but this bit I might want to spread so that you don't realize it was there anymore. So it spread and disappears with the rest. Whereas this bit, I can just rub you can hear that. I'm rubbing that very, very, very gently. It's still there. The moment I press a little bit harder, you see it's coming away. So we talk about gesture, angle, and pressure. That also applies to your hands or to the tool that you're using. If you're using cotton or rags to rub this, the pressure that you press with will determine how this charcoal behaves. So it's not just a matter of rubbing it the same way every way. It's critical. And that's what gives you control of this charcoal. And you can see what's happening here. I'll just rub right across that. Look, I'm rubbing lightly. There's those marks still there because I haven't rubbed too hard. You can go up into the upper part that I was working on earlier, and you can begin to see some nice things happening right in here. The atmosphere of this, and it's all dependent on the rubbing process this time. So the last little section was about the pressure on the actual tool. In other words, this here that we did. This bit is about the pressure we put on our finger or our rags or whatever when we manipulate it once it is on the paper. There is a term called Pentimento, which my understanding is that it means second chance or second go, and it's used in drawing. It was used way back with the old masters and the teaching of drawing, whereby an original mark would be rubbed away and then a corrected version would be drawn on top. So for instance, if someone drew someone's arm and the arm was not quite in the right proportion, they would rub it back. However, the original lines that they drew would still be there as a kind of ghost. So when you rubbed away the lines, they weren't completely disappeared. But the quality of Pentimento is that you actually see the remains of previous drawings. So this applies with charcoal very, very much. So for instance, if I was to take and make a drawing of something here, let's say I'm going to pretend that it's trees. So I'm using the flat side here. So I'm using this idea that I talked about earlier, gesture, angle, and pressure. So I'm going with a flat angle this time. I'm not using the point of charcoal, and I'm just deciding to imagine that this is a series of trees, let's say, growing up from something or other. You can see I'm just rubbing for fairly equally pressure. You know, I'm not pressing too hard. A little point there. Imagine that's a point of a little tree there. You can see, and take that over there. So for instance, if I create that, I can use this notion of Pentimento to create all sorts of space and changes. So I'm going to take this rag here and I'm going to rub right over this. So just rub it right completely back. But you can see that because I haven't rubbed too severely, number one, I've taken the white off the page, and number two, I've left a ghost of what I drew just behind there. It's faded back into the mist, if you like. And now, if I wanted to, I can redraw further shapes in front of those. So imagine that I'm drawing some more trees, little trees here. You can see the other thing I'm using here is gesture. I talked about angle. The angle of the charcoal is fairly flat. The pressure is fairly even. But the gesture I've started, you see my hand, watch my hand jiggling around. I'm not slowly doing this. I'm trying to make marks that feel like trees, if that makes sense. And I really urge you in this workshop to let yourself do this. You know, my hand is, look at the speed of my hand. It's, you know, I'm trying to move quickly, and little short jiggles. You see, like that, that's the sort of thing that I'm doing with my hand there, but with the charcoal in it, of course. So you can see there's a sort of another set of trees, if you like, happening there. So the Pentimento idea, the ghostly remains of what I'd done before are in there behind, suggesting perhaps that there are trees behind these ones. Now, theoretically, I could take, and I'm going to rub over this one, this area. So I'm going to rub that back a little bit, take away some of the charcoal, and then go back one more time and think, okay, let's this time bring the point of the charcoal up, simply because I can get more pressure this time and I can make these blacker. But the gesture's the same. You can see my hands jiggling around equally fast, but this time with the point of the charcoal. So I'm rubbing and rubbing and rubbing in between the second group of trees, if you want to call it that. This time they're very black. And this time what I might do is also rub with my finger, which I haven't done so far. So if I take and rub these very black areas a little bit, it tends to blacken them a wee bit more, make them more solid. So what we have beginning to happen here is a sense that there's something in the front here, there's something a little bit further back here, and there's something way back further. So you can see that there's a sense of trees layered, let's say in a forest or something like that. It doesn't need to be trees, it could be anything that's one thing in front of another. But what we've done is use this idea of Pentimento, the idea of putting it on and rubbing it away, and watch how that creates distance and the illusion of spaces. And experiment with this. Don't be afraid of this. I'm going to take this rag and I'm just going to rub the whole thing again. I don't really know what's going to happen, but that's okay. I'm removing most of it. And I'm left with something different, something very misty indeed. But mainly because I'm graying it all down there, but it's very interesting as well. There's just a few lines left. Some of these things I started with, they're gone, but that's okay. I can maybe decide on doing something different then. What if I go back with some darker lines in front of that? You can see here what's going on between that and these, and the illusion that we could walk behind this one into the distance. So what I want to do now is think about reversing the whole thing and think about the qualities that can appear when we literally erase away the charcoal. We looked at it slightly in the last section where we talked about Pentimento, where I was rubbing away the charcoal, but leaving the ghost of something behind. This time I'm going to experiment with removing it completely, if you like. So what I'm going to do first is create an area of charcoal. So I'm just going to try to fill this area up. You can see even what's going on now. It's interesting, look at that. You can see some of the patterns and grains coming through the paper that's underneath there, so even this whole notion of making rubbings of things with charcoal is a lovely method of mark making. But just before we go any further, because I'm noticing this, look at that. All I've done is taken the flat of the charcoal and rubbed it all over a whole area, and that's all I've done, and allow the natural patchiness of the paper to come through. But look at what we've got. Think about that and think, what does it look like? What could it be? And as the draftsperson, as the artist, this is where your strength lies. Not just getting on with it and wondering what's going on. Stop and look at this, what has happened here. And look, if I just take my finger and draw through that, I'm going to draw forest. I'm going to draw light shining through the forest between the trees. There you go. We're creating something that has a suggestion of this quality because of the mark. And it's because I stopped for a moment and thought about it. I wasn't planning to do this, by the way, but this is what it's about. Stop and say, oh, look, this could be this, that could be the other. So anyway, what I'm going to do, go back on track, getting carried away. I'm going to rub that away. You actually see the ghost of my lines there, which is lovely. So it still is a forest, only it's a dark forest this time, look. So we'll see what we can do with that. But this is more about watching how the charcoal behaves. So I've rubbed that in, so it's all a bit more flat and even now across this piece of card. You can see there's the result, but that is part of the joy of working with charcoal. What I'm going to do is experiment with removing this rubber stroke eraser. I'm just going to take the paper off that so you can see that, and just watch. Look at this, that beautiful white line that comes out against the black charcoal. So I could, again, I haven't planned this, but let's say I started talking about forests. So let's see if I make this a forest. So if I rub hard, it will get lighter. If I rub lightly, it will not be so bright. Just like charcoal, the pressure that we put on it is significant. So for instance, if I make a very light line, I'm not really pressing very much there. You can just about see a little ghostly mark there. If I come down beside it with a firmer line, I'm leaning really heavily on the rubber now, the eraser or whatever. We all called them rubbers when I was a kid, so I don't know if that's still used, but you can see what's going on. So depending on the variation between rubbing hard, pressing hard, and pressing lightly, I can create different marks. So let's experiment with that. Let's play around with the rubber eraser as a tool for drawing. So I'm going to imagine this tree here coming down, take that on up a little bit. So sometimes it's lighter, sometimes it's harder. This is fairly light at the minute. I'm just rubbing because I'm noticing I'm creating a little texture there, you know, a nice interesting sort of tree bark or something, and just playing with that here. I'll leave those for a moment. I'll put another one over here going that way, maybe in behind that one. Again, not too heavily. The reason is I'm thinking what I'll do is I'll come in a moment and rub much more heavily and maybe produce a few highlights. Let's see if I've got a branch or two there, maybe create the illusion of some branches. So we're drawing, the charcoal is in fact the base, and the rubber stroke eraser is our drawing tool. So we can create this sort of thing. And now if I say, okay, let's decide on creating more light. So in other words, I'll go down here and lighten the edge of this here a bit. So we're deciding that the light's coming from this side. So I can rub that one. I'll do the same with this. I'll create a hard, you can hear me making more effort to rub a bit harder down there. And I can brush this away very, very lightly as well. We'll talk about that in a minute also. A wee bit more light in that. And maybe go over here and do the same with this little one there, and let that maybe have a couple of branches and things. So you can see we're working in reverse now with charcoal. We're removing it. Now, what can become interesting here is we combine it with this idea we talked about, you know, the Pentimento idea. So that if I take, for instance, some of these trees and rub, so if I gently rub across this, you see how that softly pushes that tree in behind that. It just takes it into being slightly into the shadows. I could do the same, so I'll leave this one and maybe ever so lightly, I'm not really putting any pressure on, I'm just rubbing gently, and this spreading the charcoal from the outer part over the top of what I've just done. So therefore this object pushes back. So I now have two strong objects, two slightly strong, darker objects. Then I can go back in if I wanted to with the charcoal. So we can go back and forward from charcoal to eraser, charcoal to eraser. So I might decide, well, let's see if I was to make some really dark lines down the side of this trunk of a tree. So I'm creating and dab that with my hand. There's lots of marks I can make with my hand to sort of create roughness and things, and maybe a tiny bit of shadow in between these two. So maybe I can make the spaces in between a little bit darker. So I can make the shadow in there, rub that in along the edge of that. So this tree then is just coming out a wee bit, but still not as strong as this tree. And if I was to darken the space in between these two, so in other words, I get some nice deep shadow in there, this throws that one out. So we're getting variation of distance and space and illusions. And then I can go back to the eraser. I can, if I wanted to, just lift out one or two bits. I could just pick that out as if a little bit of light is catching the side of that. So you can revert charcoal, rub it out, charcoal, rub it out, and so on. You can do that for a long, long time. But be courageous about it. Try this. Don't be hung up on it. I'm just going to wipe that out. Look at that. Don't be precious about it. Look at the ghosts that are left behind here. So I can still go back and play around. What if I do the opposite this time, which is I'm going to rub away the bits in between, not the trees, but the spaces, if you like, in between. So if I rub that space and making nice gestures while I go to see what happens, then I'll rub a space, this space in between this one. So what I'm doing is the gaps are the light areas now, whereas perhaps before it was about the trees being the light areas, and we'll go in there and make this nice and energetic and light there. Maybe that little gap, I think I had a branch or something there, and bring that down here. Let that go on out there, and you can see that what I'm doing here is creating dark trees with a light space in between there. So we can work with that. And while we're at it, look, I can make gestures just as I talked about, and maybe we can create leaves. So we can maybe cut across those trees and imagine leaves hanging and cutting over them, little dots and things. So you can see the possibilities of rubbing away the white or the light from the dark. What I'd like to do now is talk about white, the introduction of white pastel or chalk into the mix along with the black charcoal, dark charcoal. White chalks or pastels, and this is a kind of a compressed white pastel I have here, behave pretty much the same way as this stuff, the black stuff. You know, the materials are pretty much the same. This is a sheet of grey card. Hopefully you can see that it's just off white. It's not the bright white that maybe we were using earlier. But you can see here that, you know, if I make lines and marks with the white charcoal, the white pastel, it behaves very much in the way that the black stuff did earlier on. I can rub that in. I can make lines. I can blur the lines slightly. Pretty much the same sorts of behavior as this stuff here. But what becomes interesting, obviously, is when we start to mix the two. So we use the white and the black together. So there are various ways in which this can be done. The most instinctive one, of course, is anybody who's ever used charcoal, I guess, I'll work up here a little bit. You know, if I take some black charcoal, rub it in as we were doing earlier, some of the white beside it here in 2 blocks, and then simply merge that with my fingers, you can see that gives a nice blend to the whole thing. And that's probably the most natural way to do it, is rubbing. And you can see the variations of grey that we're getting there. So that's perfectly fine. There are other ways. For example, we can cross hatch the lines, the marks. So what I mean is, if I was, let's say I was to take a circular sort of area there, and I was to take and cross hatch, in other words, build up a series of dark lines with the black charcoal, the dark charcoal here, and then come in with some white over here and cross that. So we're sort of dragging the black charcoal over a little bit, but we can take and keep on cross hatching that over onto that. I'll keep on taking another fresh piece of pastel here. You can see the white merging along in the middle with the black. So we have black or dark here, we have white or light here, but in the middle where the lines alternate from black to white, of course we get this illusion, this sense of grey. So I suppose what we're doing here is we're mixing the pastel charcoal together with the point. So we're not rubbing it with our fingers, we're building it up slightly more carefully. I can then go to my darker charcoal and then say, okay, let's make this edge here much darker, so I can put an arc, a very dark shadow around this spherical shape. So we're beginning to get the illusion of a ball or a sphere. Back in with my white, this time maybe not leaning so heavily, so I'm just trying to tease this edge into that dark area. So I'm not going to lean really heavily. I'm just almost like a paintbrush. You can see I'm just encouraging that to smear together, to smudge together, and you can see how that creates a half tone here. Now what I can do is take it all the way over. Now yes, of course I know I'm losing the black here, but that's okay because in a moment I can go back with the black. So we alternate from dark to light, black to white. I can go back in here, reinforce that dark edge that I had earlier and blend that. So all of this is being done with the point of the charcoal. I'm not involving my fingers at this point in time at all. I'm not merging it together, whatever. And you can see there's a lovely blended effect. It's quite exciting, sort of a thing that goes on. It's very different to the way we blend it up here, where we just simply smeared it with our hands, but they're equally valuable. It depends on what it is you're doing at any given time. I can keep on building these things. It can be quite accurate or quite careful, if you like. I can cross hatch that way a little bit now. In other words, instead of it all being in one direction, I can then take the white and rub gently over in a diagonal way, if you like. You can see what's happening, and slowly by crisscrossing the lines we can create new things. So I can go diagonally that way with the black that way, and then cut back across with the white this way. So we can, and what's happening is the lines are merging together, so it no longer looks streaky or stripy if that's what you don't want. By crisscrossing these lines, I go back to the black again here. This time I'll not bring the black just so far over, but I'm not leaning particularly heavy. These are, as you know, the charcoal we're using is really very dense, very strong, so it doesn't need to be leaned on. Back again here across itself with the white. And slowly but surely we're building up a very subtle merging, a very subtle sense of 3 dimensions simply by crisscrossing, black that way, white against it, black that way, white against it, and so on. And this will give you this lovely merged effect. You can, I guess, if we wanted to, and this kind of, goes back onto this idea, if I very gently rub this whole thing, I can probably get rid of any marks. If that's what I want, I quite like the marks, but if you wanted to, and I gently rub across that there, you can see how we soften that down. It makes that a wee bit more gentle and reflective almost. I can come in here, actually, just as a matter of interest, with the eraser stroke rubber, as we were using in the previous section, and I can take and maybe rub a highlight out of that. So if this was a snooker ball, and just get the dust off my hands and just gently rub that a little bit, you can see that we're creating a wee bit of a highlight here. If we over rub it, we can go back in and rub that away, just take some dirt off the rubber, lift up a little highlight and create some sense of shininess to this ball now. For this part, I thought what I'd do is use this. This is slightly darker grey sugar paper, which hopefully you can see will show up the white that wee bit more. So just following on from this business of blending and merging black and white, I think the next step would be to experiment and explore the marks that can be made when you do that, when you really let go with the two colors, the two tones. So for instance, we talked about gesture, angle, and pressure. I can do all of that. I can make different gestures. I can use a different angle, in other words, a flat edge of the pastel or the point or anywhere sort of in between here. So we can, and the pressure. If I press lightly, it's going to be paler. If I press hard, it's going to be stronger. All of the things that apply exactly to the black charcoal as well. But what can be very exciting is to play around and experiment with the mix of the two. So what I'm doing here is just simply creating something, possibly a landscape, doesn't really matter. But to see that how dynamic the medium is, the materials are. I'm just going to get some black into this here. So if I merge bits of black there and rub, so I'm just playing literally with the whole thing, but we can maybe create an interesting feeling of landscape here. Let's say we create that imaginary hill with dark shadows on that side and maybe sunlight or light going on in this side and merge that together. It really is very, very messy, but you can see the feeling that you get here is one of a painting. It feels like using paint because look at the mess of that, the liquidity almost of it, the fact that it flows. So this is what I would say within the workshop we want to explore. See this type of drawing as painting, and those of us who are painters will see how useful that is as preparation, if you like, for paints. So I'm making a big dynamic shape here, like a sky. Totally inventing this, and sometimes this is good to invent it because I'm not hung up on looking at something and going, oh, that's not the same as the one I have in my picture. I can enjoy discovering what these marks are doing without the burden, if you like, of having it to look like something that actually exists. And later on we can apply that to something that actually exists, of course. But you can see that I'm using the point sometimes I'm using the fingers, and so on. I'm just messing around and discovering what's going on here. But I'm getting some lovely mood into this here. Let's have some maybe nice dark section down at the bottom of this here, and a few things growing up, grasses and things. So look at the sort of marks I can make that might suggest grass or trees or foliage or whatever. Listen, I'm playing around, having great fun with these little dots and squiggles. But as I'm doing that, I'm watching very carefully. I'm not just doing it and saying, oh, this is fun. I'm trying to go, look at that. That's interesting. That's interesting. So observe as you go. We're messing, but in a thoughtful way. If that makes sense. A little darker tone over here, light on top of it. I'm trying to get the thing covered first, and then we can see what we can do from here. We've got this sort of sky area. So what if I was to take and just create a few clouds? So the flat edge of the black charcoal here, a few marks. Just tap that. It doesn't take very much with this charcoal. Compressed charcoal is so bold. You can see the marks, and then I can, if I want, soften some of these together so that it merges with the lighter tone below that. Maybe create some illusion of clouds and things going on there. And again, the good old eraser stroke rubber, we can bring it into play now. We can, if we wanted to, rub parts of this away. We can remove lumps of that. You can see the black disappearing a bit there. I'll just take some of the dirt off the rubber first of all. And down here you can see I can rub out and kind of blend. The rubber also is very useful for blending away things. You can see that's all merging together now. I can then go back in and maybe begin to be more careful. So I'm now using the point of the charcoal like I did earlier in the previous little exercise. I can then go in with my white and merge that. Remember what we did with the ball shape in the last section there. So you can see then back to the black end lightly over that until eventually we're getting a very much more controlled series of light and darks there. Go back in with the light again, rub a little bit harder and just merge that with the point of the charcoal. So there's an area that's becoming a wee bit more controlled, whereas these are maybe still a wee bit wild, but I can go in here if I want and take more time with the point of the light charcoal and create things that maybe give more impression of grasses or something growing there. But all the time I'm allowing my hand and my arms to move very freely and taking a chance. I don't really care what happens to this, whether it works or not, but it might work, it might not. It's not a picture. It's an exercise in manipulating pastel, charcoal. We can see what we're getting there. Maybe let's see what happens if we made a thundery cloud coming over the mountains here, Maybe go back in there with the white over the top of that so it's not as severe. But we're getting rain clouds now starting to happen over this. Obviously influenced by my time painting in the mornings. And I can rub right through that. Look. Let's do that. Rub. We get the storms going on there as well. All of that is just me literally messing with this stuff and one of those, and we can get all of these things and more as long as we explore and experiment and not be afraid to do so. That is the most important thing.